Hello everyone, this is Ryan. Today, we talk about something complicated, America, and why it's the most misunderstood empire in history. Across continents, generations, and ideologies, anti-American sentiment has become a moral reflex and a cultural fashion. But much of it is built on half-truths, ideology, and projection, not history. Before we begin this documentary, I want to explain why I made this video in the first place. Since I was a student, I repeatedly heard friends, classmates, and colleagues criticize America, not with a nuance, but with certainty. Whenever I said something positive about the United States, people would look at me as if I were strange, naive, or out of touch. The reaction was almost scripted. America is an imperial power. This wasn't analysis. It wasn't historical understanding. It was a social posture, a way to feel intellectually awakened, morally superior, or culturally sophisticated simply by labeling America as an empire. Over time, I realized this was not just wrong. It was psychologically twisted, a reflex that replaced thinking with performance. What many people call critique was actually mimicry, repeating slogans without understanding the complexity of America's role in the modern world, or the global systems that everyone, including its harshest critics, relies on every day. That is why I created this video. To step outside the echo chamber, to examine history, economics, and geopolitics with clarity. To understand the world as it is, not as students, activists, or self-styled intellectuals wish it to be. And to show that America, far from being a simple imperial villain, is one of the most misunderstood powers in history. The United States was already an emerging global power before the Second World War, industrial, naval, and influential. Yet, its imperial footprint was nothing like Britain, France, or Spain. While European empires carved colonies, restricted trade, and exploded territories, America largely stayed outside formal colonization. Its expansion was often indirect, influence, loans, and markets rather than direct rule. After World War II, the paradox becomes clearer. America dismantled much of the existing imperial system, helping liberate nations from colonial rule. Yet, it built a new framework for global power. The Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, GATT, allowed nations to trade, invest, and grow together. NATO provided security guarantees. Unlike previous empires, which restricted other nations from economic participation, America's empire became a platform, a global system where every nation could participate and even challenge the hegemon itself. The very openness that defined this system created an unexpected consequence: resentment. Nations and people who thrived under America's platform often criticized it as domination or interference. European economies rebuilt thanks to US aid and trade, yet intellectuals mocked American culture and politics. Japan's economic miracle, South Korea's rapid development, and Latin American exports all depended on American markets and security. Yet, anti-American protests were common. We're witnessing incomprehensible, or rather comical situations around the world. Nations that could thrive under America's open platform resent its presence. These are nations that could have never prospered under the imperial systems of the 18th and 19th centuries. Yet today, they blame the very system that enabled their growth. This is the paradox. The system that provides opportunity and growth also becomes a target of frustration. America did not extract wealth in colonial sense. Yet it became a convenient symbol for local inequality, corruption, and social tensions. Those who benefited the most were sometimes the harshest critics, a pattern repeated across continents, generations, and ideologies. In South Korea, anti-American sentiment peaked in the 1980s and early 2000s. Many college students saw the United States as an obstacle to Korean autonomy, especially regarding North Korea policy. Academic surveys show a rise in nationalist and left-leaning movements equating anti-Americanism with intellectual sophistication. But many narratives were influenced by Pyongyang. Declassified CIA documents confirm North Korea's psychological campaigns targeting South Korean students, framing the US, the Republic of Korea alliance as a symbol of subservience. Ironically, these anti-imperialist protests often echo the talking points of an actual dictatorship. In South Korea, anti-American sentiment has long been loud and visible. Students, activists, and intellectuals have protested American military presence and US policy on the Korean peninsula. Yet, a closer look reveals a paradox. Many of the same critics are avid consumers of American products. iPhones, MacBooks, Nike sneakers, and Starbucks coffee are everywhere, even in the hands of the most vocal protesters. The irony deepens with education. Families that publicly denounce the United States often send their children to study at American universities, Harvard, Yale, MIT. These names carry prestige. Yet, they coexist with a chance of down with American imperialism outside the embassy. Cultural consumption adds another layer. Anti-American activists often idolize American movies, music, fashion, and pop culture, embracing what they claim to oppose. Even travel patterns reflect this contradiction. Many journey to the US for leisure, shopping, or tourism. Technology and security reveal the final twist. Activists rely on American social media platforms to organize protests, while also enjoying the security provided by the US Republic of Korea military alliance. The result is a paradoxical reality, a generation that loudly protests American influence while simultaneously depending on the very system they claim to resist. In South Korea, the critique of America often says less about US policy and more about projection, identity, and local contradictions, a microcosm of the global misunderstanding of America itself. Japan's relationship with America has always been paradoxical. After 1945, the US occupation dismantled Japan's empire, but rebuilt its economy, education system, and security framework. During the Cold War, Japan became the world's second largest economy, protected by US military power and dependent on the American market. Anti-American sentiment is subtle, a quiet unease in a proud civilization living under another's shadow. Japan's pop culture absorbed American influence so deeply that even its rebellion, anime, literature, protest music reflects the hybrid identity America left behind. Jazz, Hollywood, baseball, and fast food flourished alongside debates of American influence. Even protests against US military bases reflect a society that benefits from the very protection it criticizes. Japan's paradox is subtle but pervasive, thriving thanks to America, yet questioning America at every turn, a quiet resentment coexisting with deep admiration. In Western Europe, anti-Americanism has intellectual roots. After World War II, Europe depended on the Marshall Plan and NATO. Yet, by the 1960s, European thinkers began framing America as culturally shallow and politically imperial. French intellectuals like Sartre critiqued consumer capitalism. British journalists mocked US populism. Beneath those critiques lay a wound. Europe's empires had fallen, while America's influence grew. The old world had become dependent on the new. Western Europe presents a complex paradox when it comes to America. After World War II, European nations depended heavily on American aid and security. The Marshall Plan rebuilt cities, revived economies, and opened markets. NATO guaranteed protection against potential Soviet aggression. Yet, even as Europe thrived thanks to America, anti-American sentiment flourished in public discourse, student movements, and intellectual circles. Protests against the Vietnam War, US interventions in Latin America, and global policies were commonplace, often led by the very generations who directly benefited from American aid and security. The paradox extends into culture and ideas. Europeans adopted American music, movies, fashion, and technology, while simultaneously criticizing US culture as shallow, commercialized, or morally deficient. The very innovations that enabled European prosperity became a target of intellectual critique. Governments collaborated closely with the United States in policy, trade, and security. Yet, citizens often protested the influence they depended on, questioning sovereignty while benefiting from protection and opportunity. Admiration, dependence, and critique coexist, a delicate balance. Europe's paradoxical anti-Americanism reflects the tension between thriving under American systems and asserting cultural and intellectual independence. In other words, Europe prospered because of America, yet America itself became a convenient symbol for critique and moral authority, a tension that persists even today. Even within the English-speaking world, America provokes ambivalence. The United Kingdom sees the US as its unruly child, successful, loud, and brash. Australia and Canada criticize US policies, but remain deeply integrated into its economy and culture. Mocking America is a way to claim moral distance, a rivalry within a family sharing the same language and systems. In the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa, anti-Americanism is rooted in history. US-backed coups in Iran, 1953. Guatemala, 1954. Chile, 1973. And Indonesia, 1965, left lasting scars. Washington often supported dictators to counter communism, leaving a legacy of mistrust. Yet, even where America is cursed, millions rely on its universities, technology, and aid programs. Criticism and dependence coexist. Across the global South, anti-American sentiment often takes paradoxical forms. Nations and communities benefit immensely from American-led systems, trade, technology, aid, and education. Yet, critique and resentment remain loud and persistent. Receiving aid versus criticizing the donor. Billions in humanitarian and development assistance flow from the United States, helping hospitals, schools, and disaster relief programs. Yet, political movements and governments often denounce American influence, even as they request or rely on the very aid they publicly oppose. Trade dependence versus blaming America for inequality. Economies across Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia rely heavily on exports to the US, and remittances from citizens working in America support millions of families. Yet, inequality, corruption, and social grievances are often blamed on American imperialism, rather than local governance failures. Cultural adoption versus political opposition. American films, music, fashion, and fast food are widely consumed, even by those who criticize US culture as corrupting or invasive. Admiration and critique coexist in a single society, a paradox repeated across cities and countries. Technology and innovation dependence versus critique. Social media platforms, cloud services, and software from the US are integral to communication, business, and activism. Yet, the same technologies are used to organize protests and campaigns criticizing the United States. Across the global South, these paradoxes reveal a simple truth. The very systems enabling opportunity, growth, and connection often become targets of frustration and symbolic critique. Resentment and dependence coexist, sometimes ironic, often paradoxical, and always revealing about the misunderstood nature of the American empire. If any nation embodies the paradox of America's empire, it is China. Since the late 1970s, China's rapid economic rise depended on access to US markets, technology, investment, and global trade networks, the very systems America created after World War II. Without these structures, China's growth would have been impossible at such scale or speed. Yet today, Beijing frames the United States as an imperial threat, a hegemon attempting to contain China's rise. It is ironic. The nation that benefited most from America's open global platform now criticizes the very system that enabled its prosperity. This is the clearest illustration of the paradoxical nature of anti-American sentiment in the modern world. America's empire is systemic, not territorial. The internet, finance, shipping routes, entertainment, and education are all structured by the US. Even adversaries depend on these systems. North Korea hacks global banks using an internet invented in America. China depends on US consumer markets and the dollar system. Russia spreads propaganda on American social media. Resistance itself is built on what America created. One truth often overlooked: America is built by immigrants. Europeans fleeing war, Asians seeking opportunity, Latin Americans chasing better lives. Together, they define modern America. Yet, in the global South, America is often viewed through the lens of old colonialism. In Mexico, slogans like "Abajo con America," "Down with America," are common. Millions of Mexicans, however, rely on remittances from relatives working in the US. Social and economic problems blamed on America often stem from local inequality, extractive elites, and governance failures. America becomes an easy target because it is visible, powerful, and global, a mirror of both aspiration and resentment. Every empire before America sought control through conquest. America achieved it through creation of systems, institutions, and networks indispensable to modern life. Critics see domination but overlook independence. They denounce American power while living through its inventions, markets, digital infrastructure, and the global language of English. To understand America is to understand the world itself, the systems we inhabit, the networks we rely on, the culture we consume. Thank you for watching. America isn't perfect. No nation is. but much of the criticism comes from misunderstanding its history and its role in shaping the modern world. To understand America is not to defend it blindly, but to see how deeply it influences all of us, often without our realizing it. This is Ryan. See you in the next one.